Queensland Premier Bligh is calling for a national ban on political donations. It follows a damning critique of the Labor government in Queensland by the former Corruption Commissioner Tony Fitzgerald. Bligh is at the ALP conference in Sydney this morning, where she spoke to our political editor David Spears.
Premier, thank you for your time. You're calling for a national ban on political donations. Why?
Well, David, I think there's been a long period of time in Australia where donations to political parties have been widely accepted, but there's growing concerns, and I think we've got to listen to those concerns. There is an expectation in the public that the relationship between business and political parties will be carefully and rigorously managed. And I think it is time for us to talk about whether in Australia it continues to be appropriate for us to have large-scale political donations being made in the way that they are.
But just to be clear, have you made up your mind on this? You don't think large-scale donations should continue?
Look, if it was up to me, I'd ban them. They're more trouble than they're worth, and they raise questions that I think, the questions are not. There isn't something there that I think is wrong, but I think it raises questions and people's public confidence is eroded.
But I guess the key here will be, what is a large-scale donation?
Well, that's one of the questions, isn't it? And I don't think you'd ever want to stop people who want to make a $20 donation to their political party of their choice. But let's be clear, what the public is concerned about is the relationship between political parties and large organisations, whether they're businesses or big lobby groups, that might be able to get some form of influence to which they would not otherwise be entitled. And we need to put a stop to that. We need to say to the public, this isn't the way we do politics in Australia. It needs to be a national ban because all major political parties are national organisations that have national offices. If Queensland or any state moved unilaterally on this, money would just move around in different ways. And I don't think that's what we're looking for. We're looking for, as a nation, a view about how we conduct political campaigns.
You mentioned that people should still be able to donate their own small amount to a political party. What about buying a table or a seat at a dinner? Now, this is an area that has been raised as a matter of concern by Tony Fitzgerald, the former Corruption Commissioner as well, that people are buying access through these dinners. Do you have a problem with those?
Well, let me make one thing clear. Political fundraising in Queensland is no different and to anything that happens in any other state of Australia by all sides of politics, and is entirely legal under our current electoral laws. There is nothing happening in Queensland that is in any way new, that hasn't been happening for many, many years and is practiced in every part of Australia. So nothing unique in Queensland. However, after many years of these practices growing over time, there is question marks from the public, and I think it's time for us to answer those questions and to revisit issues like, whether large fundraising dinners, whether big donations are the appropriate way for us to fund election campaigns.
But where do you stand on this, the fundraising dinners? Should businesses, should developers be able to buy a table, buy access that others can't?
There is no prohibition on that in our current electoral laws. It is a legitimate form of political fundraising in the current system. But we, in this country, I think, do need to start asking ourselves questions about, if we don't have those mechanisms for all political parties to raise funds to get your message out in an election, maybe we need to raise public funding. We already have some public funding for election campaigns, and you need to get the balance right between what taxpayers contribute to our democracy and what private citizens contribute.
What's been the reaction from your colleagues, your interstate colleagues on this?
My colleagues share the view that political campaigning is an important part of the democracy, and share the view that we need to make sure that there is rigorous controls in place to not only avoid any possibility but also the perception that there is undue influence happening. And that's really the concern, I think. So there is a federal discussion paper out on some of these issues, which Queensland is really saying we support. In that discussion paper, the question is raised, should we ban political donations? My view is yes.
And what about from unions as well? Would it cover donations from unions?
Well, it would have to look at all of those things, and that's why it's a very big question, and it would need to look at the other side of the equation, which is, if you can't make donations, what's the role of public funding?
And Tony Fitzgerald's criticisms were fairly broad. They touched on the fundraising dinners, they touched on some of the police corruption issues. He's also talked about former MPs being used as lobbyists and taking big fees to lobby the government. On that last one in particular, is that an area that you also think needs to be addressed?
We're moving to address the question of success fees by any lobbyist, whether they're a former member of the government or anybody, because we believe that there is a perception that someone somehow lobbying has contributed to the success or otherwise of any proposal. Queensland will move by the end of this year to be the first state in Australia that bans success fees for lobbyists. Canada does this, and there are a couple of states in the USA, but otherwise it's actually a fairly new area of law. And again, it's about public confidence, and I want the public and I want the business community to get a very clear message. In my government will assess your proposal, whether it's a bid for a contract, a proposal to change the law on something, on its merit. You do not need to pay a lobbyist, you do not need to pay a success fee to that lobbyist in order to get a proposal considered on its merit. And that's the way it should be.
Premier, you obviously sound like you want to make Queensland a beacon of clean politics, I suppose, by addressing these issues. Are you saying that Tony Fitzgerald was wrong, or was there some legitimacy to what he's saying, given what you're saying this morning?
Well, Tony Fitzgerald and his report were, a landmark opportunity 20 years ago in Queensland for us to take a very big leap forward, and we took it. And we've put in place the architecture of a major watchdog that actually gets to the bottom of corruption in the police force and other areas if it's happening. And that means from time to time, when you've got a watchdog, they'll expose things, and that, I think, is the sign of a healthy democracy, happy to look at itself and find the problems and root them out. I agree with Tony Fitzgerald that complacency is the enemy of accountability, and that's why governments have to keep moving forward and keep finding the next area of reform to make sure that you are always ahead of problems. And that's what we'll be doing. We'll be putting out a green paper on issues like political fundraising, but we'll be moving to ban success fees. Every year for the last 10 years we have put in place additional accountability mechanisms, but you can never rest on your laurels. You can never say the job is done.
Premier, thank you.
Thank you.